Welcome to HortTube. My name is Jim Putnam. This is the garden question and answer video that I do pretty much every Sunday. You can ask gardening questions down in the comment section below the video, and that's where I pick from them each week. I think there's 25 or 26 from this past week's video. And so again, thank you guys for participating. I think you can see Holly back here exploring the garden this morning. She's doing pretty well right now. 15. I probably have to start calling her 16 at some point this spring. She's still getting along okay and enjoys exploring the yard and went on a long walk this morning already. So it's overcast, cloudy morning, about 40 degrees or something here in Raleigh. I think we're not supposed to go back below freezing for the next 7 days. So nice little stretch to get some things done in the garden here in Raleigh. The Learn to Garden video series got a video from Flagler College this week. It's a tour video of kind of tropical plants. There's going to be a lot of tour videos going up on the Learn to Garden video series, just in different places in the country. A design section for the Learn to Garden video series. And there's an upcoming video on turf, one on shrubs, one on gardening for your area, just kind of differentiating the differences between, how I would garden in different zones, tools, and then one for annuals versus perennials. Those videos are upcoming videos for the Learn to Garden video series. If you're interested in purchasing it, it's over on my website, HortTube.com. The videos that went up on the channel this week, there was a screening plant video that was a lot of older footage that I used to produce that video. And it's like 50 plus screening plant options that you could use in your garden. And then, and I recommend a mixed screen, a mixed border. If you're, a lot of folks are looking for that one plant to solve a problem, but frequently they end up creating potential problems by having a monoculture, planted all the way across their garden. Maybe it's that thing becomes diseased, or an insect has a problem, have a problem with an insect disease, or it thins at the bottom, gets cold damaged, and the whole screen is impacted. So, there's a lot of reasons for using a mixed screen. And then a video on hellebores should have gone up before this one goes up. I haven't edited it yet, but should go up before this one goes up. And then a tour video from the home garden, just showing off some, we really didn't get any damage, from the coldest part of the winter. So I think, and we're probably past, the absolute coldest part of the winter. So hopefully that's behind us. So let's get to some questions, some gardening questions from last week. Let's see. Somebody said they haven't planted their bulbs yet, and what should they do? Should they wait until this next year? No, you definitely still need to plant them. If you've got bulbs that are out of the ground, not tropical bulbs, not your summer bulbs, but certainly any of your early spring flowering bulbs, the daffodils and tulips and crocus and all those kinds of bulbs that we typically plant back in the fall or early winter. If you have them, you need to put them in the ground. They'll be dead in all likelihood by the time next year rolls around. And I would imagine that some of the ones you even have now will be, you'll know which ones are good and which ones aren't. You can kind of squeeze a daffodil bulb or a tulip bulb, and if it's soft feeling or it just implodes, like it becomes dust inside, then you'll know which ones are good and bad. If they've discolored, throw them to the side, don't plant them. But all the good ones you could definitely put in the ground, and I would do it now. It may take, I don't know what kind of cold we'll have left on them, or if you've been refrigerating them, or where they came out of, but some portion of them will still be good. But if you wait until next year to plant them, they probably have 0 of them will be good. So somebody had asked this question a couple times, and I'd written it down last week and somehow skipped the question. They got an amaryllis bulb and it's got some wax on it. You'll see more and more of this. They're like, they'll take the big amaryllis bulbs and they'll dip them in wax, sometimes decorative wax, sometimes non-decorative wax, and then sell them that way. And what it is you're supposed to be able to grow that bulb with the flower without actually planting it. It doesn't need any additional water. They basically encased the thing in wax to prevent water from evaporating out of the bulb. The same thing that's killing your bulbs that I just talked about, the ones that you should definitely put in the ground. Water's evaporating out of them, and that's killing them over time. The same thing happens with amaryllis, but they dip them in wax, again, sometimes decorative, and then you can just set the bulb on a counter and have it grow. They were saying it's growing slower than others. I don't know if that's related to the wax. It probably is, but I've got 9 amaryllis bulbs on the dryer just inside the house. And some of them have already bloomed out, and a couple of them are just getting started, and they were all planted at the same time. None of them are waxed. So there can be some variation just in the particular, you know, when the bulbs were dug, how much cold they were exposed to, the particular variety, you know, cultivar named variety. There'll be variation in that. Holly, come here, girl. So there could be a lot of variation in that. So don't know that it's related to the wax, but the wax is on them so that you can just put the bulb on the counter. You don't have to put it in soil. You don't have to water it. You don't have to do any maintenance to it. And then it's just thrown out afterwards is the idea behind that. We take ours and plant them in the ground, and we get some of them to do okay here in Raleigh, and sometimes they rot. Well, we have probably 6 or 8 out here in the garden now that are doing pretty well. So somebody asked, why is it necessary to cut out plant reversions? In the other video we did in St. Augustine, the one that went on the main channel, there was an arbicola, variegated arbicola, that I said had some green in it. And they asked why to cut it out. And I've shown this a few times over the years. If you have a variegated plant, this abelia would be a great example of that. So this variegated abelia, this Miss Lemon abelia, if I started seeing green branches in it, I need to get those green branches cut out quick, because it's going to outgrow the variegated plant that I bought. And the reason for that is the green branch has a lot more chlorophyll in it, and that chlorophyll is going to allow that plant to grow much faster. So these variegated plants are typically a little slower growing because they lack the same kind of dark, that green chlorophyll that makes up, you know, the plant that behind, there's a gardenia behind it, this solid green. But anyway, so if you get those green reversions in these plants, if you don't cut them out pretty quick, that green will outpace and outgrow the variegated plant. It won't kill the plant, it'll just eventually be almost all green instead of the variegated plant that you bought. So that's the reason why you cut out those reversions that happen in these variegated plants. Because that part will grow faster, and it doesn't look like the plant you bought, right? You bought a variegated plant, or you bought a gold foliage plant, or a chartreuse colored plant, and then all of a sudden it's got a green branch on it. It's not even the plant you bought. Keep in mind, this variegated plant was a sport of a green abelia, okay? So there's, you know, it's not necessarily 100% stable, you know, in that variegation. It was an unstable part of the green plant, so it could definitely go back to the green variety that it was taken off of. Although we're at a point now where most of these variegated abelia are sports from other variegated abelia. So just variations on. So we're getting further and further away. There seems to be a lot less reversions in the newer variegated abelia than there used to be in the older varieties, the original variegated abelia varieties. So somebody asked when to transplant irises, and these were their grandmothers who bred them. And so they're pretty precious to them. I read the question, I was like, don't do that to me. Don't be asking me questions about stuff that you definitely, you know, don't want to lose. So a couple things. I don't know what type of irises these are. Most of the time, I would do those irises after they've bloomed. Most irises I would do after they've bloomed sometime in the summertime. And you'll hear me talk about mostly late winter dividing of a lot of things. But if I was going to give a general thing for all irises, I would say sometime in the summertime after they have bloomed, you can divide them. In fact, you know, it's conversations with Tony Avent about perennials in general. The summertime, they're actively growing roots, and they tend to get established a little bit quicker during the summertime. It's kind of opposite of, you know, the stress that we might think about on trees or shrubs or other things. But these perennials, a lot of our herbaceous perennials are doing their most growing during the heat of the summer, and they're able to put on roots really quickly. You know, that time of year, dividing them, transplanting, that kind of thing, they're more likely to take it. You know, tougher transplant. What seems like very tough conditions for us outside digging when it's hot, they can push roots during that period of time. Now, if I had something like this that I was transplanting and I was worried about them, they were trying to breed pink, her grandmother was trying to breed pink ones. I just wouldn't transplant all of them at one time. So I would maybe try 2/3 of them, sometime during the summertime after they've bloomed, and leave some in place just in case something goes wrong. Seems like a good backup plan for that, but that would be my thoughts on it. So somebody asked, what do days to maturity on a seed packet mean? And I'll talk about this. We'll do some of our summer vegetable seeding coming up. We divide our seeds. We do our seed starting based on days to maturity, and that's basically the time you put the seed in the tray, or the seed in the, whatever you're starting the seed in. The time you start the seed until the time you can transplant it into the vegetable garden. Well, days to maturity will typically mean the days until you're going to get fruit on it. So the days from the day you plant the seed until how many days it will take to typically get fruit on it. So if I was going to direct seed it in the ground in the vegetable garden, if that's, it might say, 70 days to maturity or something like that. That's how long they expect that seed to take to start producing fruit. There's also going to be on the seed packet days to transplant. So that is the thing I look at on the seed packet, where I'm starting my seed. Like peppers will typically say 6 to 8 weeks to transplant. So that means that how long starting a seed in a tray is going to take me to get to a transplantable size plant to go into the vegetable garden. So those are two different things. Days to maturity is from seed to fruit, or whatever, vegetable, whatever. And days to transplant is the day from you start the seed until you put it in the ground, if you're pre-starting the seeds and not putting them directly in the ground. So for me, I actually arrange my seeds based on how long it takes for the seed to start it from seed and get it to a transplantable size. So we'll start with peppers are one of the first things we do for our summer vegetables because they take longer typically. Tomatoes, typically you're going to say 4 to 6 weeks on the packet, something like that. You'll get things that say 3 to 4 weeks on the packet. And our seeds are basically stacked that way. The 6 to 8 stuff is the first stuff we do, and then the 4 to 6 week stuff, and then they all hopefully are all about ready about April 15th, which is our average last frost date. So we just back up from that. So I need to go 8 weeks before April 15th. That's when I would start my peppers. So, but those are two different things you'll see on the packet. But the maturity is when you'd expect to have fruit on it. So somebody has Ralston hardy viburnum, which is a dwarf viburnum obavatum. That video that I put up on the Learn to Garden video series has some beautiful viburnum obavatum as boxed, it basically is boxwoods at Flagler College. If you've watched that video, those of you who own the Learn to Garden video series this week. Ralston hardy is a dwarf one. I have one back here that's 2 feet. If you watch the tour videos, it'll show up periodically and more frequently than other things because it's always blooming, like always blooming. 6 months out of the year, that thing has flowers on it, which is kind of amazing. They're over in Greensboro, North Carolina, and theirs is defoliated the last 2 winters. Greensboro is definitely colder than us. My son lives over in Greensboro, and I used to sell at the Greensboro Farmers Market or the Triad Farmers Market. I used to sell at the Raleigh Farmers Market and then, go to Greensboro as well. And that farmers market, this Raleigh Farmers Market, I could be out here on a March, as early as March selling. That Greensboro Farmers Market was sometimes a month later before, and that's just, it's an hour and a 20-minute drive, an hour and, 25-minute drive to that farmer's market for me, and, a little less than that probably. And there was that much of a difference in how cold the nights are in Greensboro and how consistent it stays cold. They get more rain than we get. In the late winter and early spring. It was interesting. I'd be over here selling in Raleigh and I'd call the person working for me in Greensboro. And over here in Raleigh, it was 75 degrees Saturday. And over there, it was a 57-degree Saturday and raining. And it was just such a difference between those two spaces. So it really changes radically across North Carolina as you go from east to west pretty quickly. But anyway, their Ralston hardy viburnum are defoliating. And they're going to transplant them to a more protected space, wanted to know what to use. If it's in a really exposed space, you might want to think about something as like a boxwood. That unraveled boxwood that I showed over at the Ralston in a video a couple weeks ago is a really fantastic looking, interesting boxwood. Let's see. And I'm going to do another That video that I did this week on all the screening plants, there's gonna be one on small plants, smaller growing plants as well coming up. Somebody asked how to remove Chinese privet from the middle of a mature azalea. I don't know how big the privet is. I'll get those sneaky ligustrum coming up in shrubs during the season out here, and you don't notice it until winter time, and they're already up about this much. And I actually see one over here by the porch right now. You know, we have so many ligustrum seeding themselves out in this neighborhood. There's a giant one over here, different varieties of Japanese and Chinese ligustrum, but you know, they're seeding themselves like crazy. So they're basically just weeds in this garden. You know, how to remove a more mature plant. I have dug plants up before. I'll dig something like an azalea up like that and then separate the two and then replant the azalea. That's an option. The other thing to do is just saw the thing, you know, down to the ground, and then, you know, just deny it light for some period of time. But when you get those blending, you know, I said in last week's video, somebody had the forsythia with the wisteria growing in it. And I just said dig the things up and just replant a couple of the clumps of those plants. I mean, sometimes it's just better to go at it like that. Just dig the thing out and replant the one you want. I just don't know how big the Chinese privet is at this point, but it will definitely outgrow any azalea and kill it over time. Somebody said they have squirrels yearly take their green tomatoes. How to prevent it? You got to cover them. You have to use some sort of netting over the top of them otherwise. And then squirrels are awful creatures like this for our gardens, because most of the time, they won't eat them. You know, they'll just pick your green tomato, take a bite of it and go, that's not good. Let me try another one. It's like they just want the moisture out of it or something, and then they don't like them and they throw them on the ground. They do the same thing with my neighbor's fig over here. My neighbor has a fig tree that just produces like crazy, but the squirrels just go up there and bite them, throw them on the ground, bite them, throw them on the ground. It's like, eat the thing. I'll share it with you. Just eat it. And instead, they just ruin them. But yeah, you have to throw some sort of net over them. Squirrels are just different. Now, we have a terrible rabbit problem in this garden, and they're working on my pansies that are around me right now. They look terrible. But we have the vegetable garden over there netted off for the rabbits. Rabbits are easy to prevent from getting into a space. Squirrels, of course, you know, there's no stop. They'll just climb right over that. They have the option. They'll jump from the top of a house to get into something like that. So you have to net it from the top and all the way around is really the only way to combat them. They are a pain to garden with. There's no doubt about that, especially if you're growing edible things. So somebody has their neighbor's azalea comes over their driveway. It's a good screen, so they're not trying to get rid of it or anything. Can they cut it hard from their side after it blooms? Yes. They want to prune about a third of the growth off of it. A mature azalea, you can cut to the ground and it'll come back from that. Not telling people to do that, but if you need one to reset, you know, you can do that with an azalea. You can cut them right to the ground. So taking a third of it off after it blooms would probably be my normal pruning behavior, actually, just to keep them full. So somebody has 3 large shrubs. They did not ID to talk about what they were. They're in zone 8B, North Carolina, so probably somewhere down by Wilmington or something. They root pruned them. How much growth should they take off the top of them to ease the transplanting? So I've talked about when you transplant something, sometimes it's a good idea to take some of the top of the plant off, just to cut back some portion of the top of the plant, just to rebalance it, right? Because you're damaging roots that are supporting the top of the plant. You probably are not taking enough roots with it to maintain the whole top of the plant. If you're still transplanting them when it's cool outside, you can probably get away with keeping the plant almost entirely intact and just maybe doing a very small amount of pruning. The hotter it is, the tougher the conditions outside, the more pruning I'd probably do off of it. So that's the way I would gauge that. But if I was going to transplant something today on a 60-degree overcast day in February, you know, if I was going to move that abelia, I could probably do it without cutting anything off of it, just because all the stars align. You know, there's no extremes going on whatsoever. The later I push this into the late winter and early spring and warmer days, a sunnier day, the more likely I'd be to prune this plant back some, and maybe as much as a third of it off if it was, if I waited until April. So that's the way I would, think about that. If you're doing it on a day that seems very low stress, you don't see any serious cold coming, you don't see any serious hot coming, you're able to water it some, during the transition. You don't have to take a whole lot off of it. Later in the season, you would. Okay, somebody is in 9A, Zone 9A, Florida. They got a Sweet Bay Magnolia that's multi-trunked, and it's sending up more trunks. Are they okay multi-trunked? Yeah, you can have single-trunked Sweet Bay Magnolias, but actually the vast majority of them I see usually have several trunks coming from the base. Will they survive like this? Yeah, no problem. Now, I wouldn't allow any more suckers though. If you have like a 3-trunk Sweet Bay Magnolia, that's how I would want it. Any other suckers that are trying to come up, I would cut those down to the ground. So that just keep it as a 3-trunk at the most, because each of those new trunks that are coming up, if you end up with a 30-trunk Sweet Bay Magnolia, number one, all the limbs are going to rub together, and that's going to be problematic. You're never going to be able to prune it properly to get air movement through it. You're never going to be able to prune it properly to keep it from damaging itself with the limbs rubbing. And I also think you're going to get smaller flowers, because each of those plants just basically become individual plants competing against one another. So I would keep it at 3, and I think it'll be a nice looking tree. Somebody wants to create one of the contorted Japanese maples like I have over here, and I've done in a video. I need to, I don't even know where that plant is. I think it's over there in that collection of plants in the corner over there, Colt. But I'm working on a couple contorted Japanese maples right now. They want to know if they should wire it now while it's dormant, meaning no leaves on the tree, or wait until it leaves out. I would do it sooner the better. So the more pliable that branch is, the more easily you're going to be able to bend it back and forth to contort it. So the faster you can do it, whether it has leaves or doesn't have leaves, I would do it. Let's see. The thinner the limbs, the easier they are to bend, obviously. So something's, next question is also Japanese maple. When something's chewing on the limbs on their Japanese maples, Squirrels question mark in their question. Will this harm it, and how can they prevent this? We actually had one of our Japanese maples in the front garden out there got eaten by deer last year. So it could be a deer. It could certainly be a squirrel chewing on. Squirrels will typically just chew on bark and stuff. They typically don't eat the top of the plant down. Probably squirrels out there that do that though. Of course, rabbits are, I don't know how tall the plant is, but if it's tall enough, if it's short enough, rabbits will eat the stems on them too. I don't know what it is about them, but they will get chewed on, by quite a few animals. Yeah, it'll definitely harm it. You need to put some sort of cage over it. Ours has recovered in a very odd way out front. So I'm going to have to do a little bit of work now to re-stake it and reform it a bit, because it literally, a deer came and just bit the top right out of it. So that may be what you're experiencing. So somebody loves arborvita fern, another bad common name for a plant. So this genus Selaginella, they're club mosses. They're related to ferns in they look like ferns, but a little bit like ferns, and I think people would identify them as ferns if they didn't know what club mosses were. I have Selaginella braunii over here, which is arborvita fern. It's neither an arborvita or a fern. Again, lots of bad common names that could confuse us, but Selaginella is a great genus. I was over in Berlin at the Botanic Garden middle of last year, visiting my son, and there were so many cool Selaginella species in their indoor facility. A lot of those are tropical. Most of Selaginella are tropical species. So there's a lot of species in this genus, and they're all really super interesting. This person really likes them. I wanted to know if I had any favorites, because when they look it up, most of them are supposed to be grown in terrariums. Yes, and that's accurate. A lot of Selaginellas, club mosses, are grown in terrariums because they're tropical plants. They're from tropical areas of the world. Obviously in moist forest conditions is where these things, a lot of them came from. But again, I have Selaginella braunii. That's the one you're probably going to find most common. It's arborvita fern. There's a species called a poda. Over at the Ralston, they have Peruviana. Emiliana. Look up the JC. So my point is about to be, look up the JC Ralston website and Selaginella, and you'll find all the ones that are growing over at the Ralston. I need to do a video probably with Mark at some point on Selaginella, or someone over at the Ralston, just because it is such a cool group of plants, and I really love our arborvitae fern over there. It turns kind of a rust color this time of year, but the rest of the year it has this really soft texture. They're fantastic ornamental plants, but there's not many of them that are really, really cold hardy. But some of the ones I just mentioned are zone 5 cold hardy. So the ones that are cold hardy are very cold hardy, and then there's a bunch of tropical species that are not. But if you have a moist, kind of part shade condition area, they're really cool, interesting, fern-like plants, but they are their own genus and own plant. It's the only genus within the plant family, Selaginella acea, I think is what it is. I think it's Selaginella acea. It's a long one. Okay, somebody asked, they've got a mulched bed. They've been mulching it for 3 years with pine bark. Wondered if they should change to another mulch, some sort of another hardwood mulch for the season. It takes a long time for this bark to break down. Cost is about the same to them. Yeah, so if I mulch this place with pine bark, just plain pine bark, the bark, and here's some right here. I use pine bark for our annual planting, so that's, hopefully you can see that. That's a chunk of pine bark right there. It takes a long time for this stuff to break down, and it's really good for growing plants in. Again, if you flip over a 3-gallon container that you buy a shrub in, it's going to be grown in some sort of pine bark like that. It's great for growing my annuals in because it lasts a long time, and the plants can really root through it very easily, which is the reason it's used in container mixes. The problem with it, though, is if at the end of the day, my goal here is to improve soil, and putting down a mulch that breaks down slowly also improves my soil slowly, right? And so that's the reason I like to use the hardwood mulch. It is bark, but it tends to break down a little faster than the pine mulch, than the pine bark. But it also has some wood product in it. So when you get the hardwood mulch, you'll see, let me see if there's any that hadn't broken down so much that I could find. Okay, yeah. So my hardwood mulch, if I can get the leaves and stuff out of it, my hardwood mulch will have some wood in it. There's a piece of wood right there. So it'll have wood fiber and bark fiber, and it tends to break down a little faster. And a lot of people don't want their mulch to break down because then they have to remulch. But it's kind of the point to create the mulch that you're using to break down over the season, because it's being converted into food for your plants. It's being converted into humus and the things that the earthworms and the other creatures in the soil need to feed on. And you know, some of those creatures are just doing aerating in your soil. They're going up and down through it and carrying these things down into the deeper parts of they're making your soil less compact. So yes, using some sort of mulch that actually breaks down over the course of the season is going to be more beneficial to your soil than using a pure bark like this pine bark mix. So yeah, I would switch at least a season or two and try to get some soil improvement going a little bit faster. But I do understand the point of people wanting to use rock or use, something that's like a permanent rubber mulch and all the, things that people want to sell us for mulches that last forever, or some sort of treated material that's supposed to last forever. But really, my point in putting mulch out here is it's like, I always talk about how little I fertilize. The mulch is fertilizer. So, it's part of my fertilizing program is the mulch. Okay, let's see. Somebody ordered a grapevine mail order. What should they do when it arrives? Plant it, or is it too early? I think if it's a dormant, so I base these things on how it looks as I receive it in my area. So if I order this grape from the Gulf Coast and I live in Michigan and I take it out of the box and it's in leaf, or it looks like it's budded up and about to leaf out, then I'm probably not going to plant it. But if it's dormant, I'd absolutely put it in the ground. if the ground's workable in your area. And I don't know where, oh, this person was in 8A, North Carolina. Yeah, I'm probably gonna plant it as long as it's not completely leafed out way ahead of time. But if it looks like it should look right now, which is a dormant stick, then I'd absolutely go ahead and put it in the ground. Let's see. So landscaper planted a red bud a few years ago. It doesn't have any root flare. Should they dig it up and raise it? That's a great question. What we mean by root flare is down toward the bottom of every tree. And once you notice this, you'll notice it all over the place. You should have a bit of a flare where the trunk gets slightly wider right before it disappears into the ground. That's called the root flare. Any tree that kind of grows naturally, that seeds itself someplace, you'll notice the root flare on them, right before they go down into the ground. We shouldn't be covering that up with mulch or burying it with anything. What happens in the nursery, sometimes, I don't know whether this is a red bud seedling or a grafted one like my weeping red bud back here, but what can happen is it maybe get field grown over in Tennessee, and then it gets dug up, bare root this time of year, and it goes to a nursery, and the nursery may have planted it too low in the container when they were taking the bare root plant and putting it in a container. Maybe it got planted from a 3-gallon container at the nursery into a 25-gallon container or a 15-gallon container at some point. That person planted it too low in the container. Maybe the landscaper bought one and the flare was there and they planted it too low, but at some point, somebody planted this tree a little too low, and that root flare is down below the soil, and it's not great. Typically, you'll typically get less vigorous growth. If you're not experiencing less vigorous growth, I'm absolutely leaving the thing alone, and I'm not doing anything with it. The only time I would go in there and raise it up at this point was if I felt like the thing had been in the ground, and it says a few years on here. If you're telling me it's been in the ground for a few years and it hasn't grown, absolutely, I'm raising that thing up. I'm trying to find that root flare and I'm going to get it raised up some. But if you're telling me it's been in the ground for a few years and it's grown fine, but you can't see the root flare, I'm leaving it alone. So that's the way I would think about that probably. Let's see, so they're in 8B, Mississippi. They had an Osmanthus injured 2 years ago in the cold, and then they've had drought and heat-related stress on it. They cut about 1/3 of it off. It has thinned inner branches. Any chance of it recovering? Yeah, it'll probably recover in time. You're in an area that they grow fine in, and it probably will recover. How patient you are is the question. It might be, for me, I don't know how big the thing was when you planted it or how much it cost you, but if you could get a 3-gallon one somewhere for $30, and it's the same size as you have in the ground, I might go and do that. Again, sometimes I get, one of the things I like to point out to folks is if you have a plant, and I've said this a lot of times, but if it's true, if you have something that's taking up 50% of your thought in your garden, either get rid of it, replace it, or stop worrying about it. It's just don't stress so much on one thing. If there's something out there that's not making you happy, tear it out, move on. It seems like it might be worth spending a little bit of money on something like that. I'm always about trying to do things as inexpensively as possible. But if you have to wait 3 years for the thing to recover, whereas you could go get a 3-gallon one this spring and get it in the ground and get it established before next winter, get some growth on it this year, that might make you more happy. Okay, so somebody asked me my thoughts on sweet gums. Are they a nuisance or a great native? So if I say anything about sweet gums on this channel, man, I'm gonna get, it doesn't even matter if I say they're good or bad. People are gonna be, I would never have one, I hate them things. And they are, those little gumball things, just annoy people to no end. In fact, I did a video on narrow upright trees, and there's a narrow upright sweet gum at the Ralston, and there were a bunch of comments below that video about, blah, blah, about that. But that tree has hardly any. It does drop them. It does drop a few, but it's an upright, super skinny one, and very few, it has very few of those dropping off of it in comparison to a regular native sweet gum. So they are a mess. and a lot of people don't like them because of that, especially if you had one like over a deck or a port or patio or something like that where you're constantly walking onto things. I get it, but there are, we do have fruitless sweet gums now. So, you know, there's a solution for this. If you want to plant a sweet gum, you can plant a seedless sweet gum and get all the benefits of a sweet gum without having that as an issue. So Rotunda loba, I think, is the one, the seedless sweet gum. Okay. Somebody has a dwarf butterfly bush in 7B, Maryland, and it still has foliage. Is this normal? Yes, mine has. We've had 16 degrees a couple times. Every one of my butterfly bushes has foliage on them. I can see 1, 2, 3, 4 behind me and one behind the camera over there. Every one of them has foliage. It is pretty normal, especially in areas, you know, in zone 7 for sure, to still have foliage on them. I'll cut them back regardless here in the next few weeks. So it's about time to cut my butterfly bushes back. I'm sure that will be in a video. Somebody said that I mentioned maybe as far back as a couple years ago, I wanted to make this garden self-contained. How is that working out? So by self-contained, I meant that I wouldn't bring anything in, I wouldn't need to bring anything into this garden in the future. No fertilizer bought off the property, mulches, those kinds of things. Once the plants get some size on them, I can use the things I cut off the plants. Like again, I'm about to cut all the butterfly bushes back. I can just run those through my chipper or put them on the compost pile and let them compost and then reuse those as mulch in the garden. The leaves are on the beds back here. And you know, those are my mulch for the winter time. I really don't have to fertilize this spring. I am gonna fertilize a small amount this spring. And again, I typically make that. So to answer your question, sometimes I let the content of this channel determine what I'm doing here a bit. And I don't really want to do that. I don't want, you know, I don't want a channel that is, you know, let me see how many clicks I can get on something. There's a few other, you know, gardening channels that pop up in my queue. Again, I don't watch other gardening videos, but I can tell that they've used the Mr. Beast way of YouTube, which is, I'm gonna think of the thumbnail first and the title of the video first, and then I'm going to make a video. So let's come up with 10 things you should never do in your garden. You know, it's just like, it's from a negative view, but it's a clickbait. You know, it's a video just to get clicks. I've already thought of the thumbnail is going to be outrageous. Things you shouldn't do in your garden ever. And you click back from that. And so I've never wanted my channel to be a channel where I'm thinking about getting clicks or whatever. But I will say that occasionally my, you know, a couple things I do in this garden are driven by, you know, content. And one of those is fertilizing. I bet I didn't fertilize my shrubs at the old house more than 4 times in 23 years. You know, if you're mulching, like I just said with the hardwood mulch, you really, our soils are pretty good here. This clay can be annoying to dig in, but it's got all the things that the plants need, as long as I'm planting correctly in it, and I'm, again, adding organic material to it. They don't need fertilizer. So I'm gonna put up a fertilizer video in a few weeks, and it is kind of content related. But it's really not me pushing fertilizer. I'll be telling people how little I fertilize in a year because I'm doing all these other nutrients. The other thing is I'm gonna bring in some hardwood, 1 load of hardwood mulch for the year onto the driveway to cover up these leaves to make this garden look a little more presentable on camera during the spring season, because it will take away, if these beds don't look, if the ground doesn't look perfect, I'll get comments below the videos, it all looks a mess. You know, it all looks messy. And I'm sure behind me right now, it probably does look messy. But this is the way a garden, you know, this is the natural way a garden works, right? Leaves drop on the ground and those are the insulation for the winter. I don't have any winter damage. You know, my perennials got covered in some leaves. The robins are out here flipping the leaves over and taking up all of these, you know, taking care of any of the insect problems that might be created by having leaves on the ground. But it, unfortunately, can take away from me being able to teach gardening if it looks a bit of a mess. And so I probably do a couple of things, you know, again, way less than others, to make sure that it looks neat enough that I can get my other points across, which are really points based on you don't have to spend a lot of money to do this. So those are two things that I'll be doing this spring that are not the closed loop system that I had talked about. So that's just me being, you know, completely straightforward with the channel. I don't need to do either one of those two things. There's enough material on these plants to cut back and produce enough mulch out here on this very small urban lot in Raleigh where I don't really need to bring anything into this garden at this point other than fun new plants I want out here or moving things around or whatever. Okay, that was a lot of words for that, right? And then the very next question is somebody's using a spoma fertilizer this spring. Is plant tone the best to use? In all likelihood, for most people, plant tone is probably the one to use. You can use holly tone if you have a very high pH. You can use holly tone. Again, I've talked about, you know, that sulfur additive that's in there is going to be very temporary in lowering the pH. It's not a long-term solution. You should probably be looking for plants that fit if you have alkaline soils. Okay, so somebody's in Cary, North Carolina. Is it normal for their Farfugium to die back to the ground? They see them evergreen in South Carolina. Yeah, my Farfugium absolutely got nuked while we were gone at 16 degrees. It seems to be somewhere in the teens that they die completely back to the ground. So if you haven't, you know, mid-20s, they seem to be okay. I've got one Farfugium that's not died to the ground and one that's just became liquid. They come right back from it without any problem. Next up is another opinion one. You know, people want me to stick my neck out, you know, to get it chopped off on some of these questions. This is my opinion on Bradford pears. Why are they so hated now? Are there other trees that are overall disliked? Okay, so the story of the Bradford pear, gosh, man, when I started working in this business, I was 16 years old at a garden center in North Raleigh, and we couldn't get Bradford pears in fast enough. This whole city was covered in Bradford pears. And originally, you know, they grew in this perfect little uniform lollipop shape. They bloom, you know, with those white flowers. They get good fall color. They had this great, you know, really interesting structure where you could line up, kind of unusual for trees, where you could line up 10 of them in a row and have 10 kind of identical trees. It was just, you know, that everybody wanted them. Just everybody wanted this formal looking lollipop tree. As they mature, they have serious issues with storm related damage. You know, they can just absolutely break apart. They grow so fast, and a lot of fast growing trees, this is what happens to them. They can have weak wood, and so they fall apart in storms. And so they were already kind of in decline, not as many being planted. Honestly, the flowers smell awful to me. You know, yes, they flower beautifully, but man, the flowers smell just awful to me. So I've never been a fan. I'm not really a fan of plants that grow as little lollipops like that anyway. I tend to have more of an informal look, although there are a couple lollipop looking things out here, but I tend to be drawn to plants that are a little more informal looking. But where it really becomes hated is when it was originally being sold, it was sold as a sterile plant. It never seeded itself. It wasn't going to be a problem. But what the actual issue was is this plant it didn't have the right dance partner to produce seed. And so because Bradford pears were so weak, because there were issues with them, people were looking to improve them, introduce new ones. There was a Cleveland pear that was supposed to be more sturdy, less likely to be damaged by ice or wind or storms or whatever. So other ones come about, and all of a sudden the thing produces viable seed. And the Calorie pear, I think, is probably going to be potentially the worst noxious, invasive plant maybe we've ever had. And you know, that puts it above kudzu and all kinds of other, you know, Chinese privet that we talked about earlier, and all kinds of other plants. I see that plant taking over spaces now. I mean, you'll see this spring, if I don't know what area of the country you live in, but I want you to pay attention when they start blooming in the woods in the next few weeks. They kind of disappear in the summertime and you don't see that they're there. But in the next probably month and a half when they start blooming, you'll notice them just everywhere in the wooded spaces. Our area here in the Triangle and back toward Greensboro, I made a drive over there for something last year when the Callery pears were blooming in the woods, and it was just wild. The other thing that I think it's going to do is any kind of clearing. Let's say I cleared this wooded area right now. I just cleared all the plants out of here. Normally, what would happen, the earth is always trying to heal itself, right? I mean, so you would immediately get grasses and whatever seeds that are very quick to germinate would cover that ground pretty quickly. In a typical southern area, we would get pines that would come up next. So you have this succession of things that happen, right? And then after the pines, you would get the hardwoods that would be a little bit slower, and this forest would take shape through a succession of things happening, okay? Over a long period, over decades, right? When you clear space right now, Callery pears come up so fast and grow so quickly that they will take out anything that's going to happen, should normally happen in that space. And so this is why I think this plant's going to be the worst. I mean, I think it may already be the worst noxious weed we've ever seen. So if you want to know why Bradford pears are hated, that's the reason why. In South Carolina, they're paying people to take the Bradford pears out of their gardens because they know how bad this is going to be. I don't think killing a single Bradford pear is going to make a difference now. And this is where my opinion, it's like telling people not to grow Ligustrum recurvifolium because it's invasive. Well, I mean, they're literally everywhere. It's like not growing, once a plant has, reached this point, I mean, there's no point in even having a conversation about it. I don't know what to do about this plant. Hopefully it overpopulates itself to the point where something becomes a control for it, some sort of insect, some sort of bird starts eating the seed. Something happens to control it, because otherwise that thing is out of control. And I think over the next 8 weeks or so, we'll see. It's worse every year, and it's just taking over spaces. And I think one of the issues, again, is like it disappears during the summer, so you don't pay any attention to it being there. But when they flower, they're just literally everywhere. Somebody has a 15-year-old Japanese maple. It's too close to the house. They always have to hard prune it. Should they remove it entirely? Yes, again, they answer. If you've gotten to the point where you're asking me this question and you're having to hack on this tree every year and it's just problematic to you, I'm absolutely removing it. You can try to transplant it if you wanted to while it's dormant. But again, if it's not making you happy, find something that is. Let's see, two more this week. I think that'll end up being about 26. Somebody asked, what is bark scale? I talked about last week on the crepe myrtles getting bark scale. Scale insects are little insects that basically they attach themselves to the plant, become kind of hard-bodied, and then they suck sap from the tree, and they produce honeydew just like other sucking insects like aphids, and so their secretions can get this black sooty mold on them. But on the crepe myrtle bark scale, the females have a little bit of a furry back to them. You can tell the difference between the males and the females bark scale on the tree. Again, this started, got here down in the Gulf, and now it's spread pretty much everywhere. And the crepe myrtles with the worst, with a lot of stress, seem to really be the ones that seem to be the most vulnerable to it. There are scale insects, all kinds of scale insects, and a lot of them are very particular on the plants that they're on. So there's T-scale, so all the camellias. I've got Camellia sasanquas out here and Camellia japonicas, and if we looked on the back of them, Camellia family is the same family that has tea. Camellia sinensis is tea that we drink. So that type of scale is called T-scale because it's very specific to camellias. There's Magnolia scale. It's a big fluffy scale that magnolias get, but some of these scales can go into other plants as well, but most of them are very specific. So there's euonymus scale. A lot of euonymus species get a particular armored scale on the, somebody told me one time there's two types of euonymus with scale and euonymus that are about to get scale. but they're scale insects that are very particular for, you know, different genuses and different species, even species, down to the species probably, for the plants that they like to suck the juices out of. But their scale insects can be particularly hard to control because they're armored. There's basically a little armored insect that attaches itself to the tree, and it has sucking parts that you can't see on the other side of it. Okay, last question for this week, another opinion one, and I kind of covered this earlier. You know, somebody asked, what are some dumb things that I've heard in gardening? And it's not, you know, I don't want to answer that in some sort of, you know, dumb things, but there is a lot of clickbait out there for, you know, growing mangoes and bananas and, you know, whatever it is. I don't know what it is. But there's all, you know, I could take a different path. I know that I could take a very different path and have a much different channel and have a lot more views and make a lot more money on YouTube than I currently do. There's no question that you could, again, reverse engineer YouTube, which is, you know, that style that a lot of the big viewers get. You know, let me make a basketball shot from 100 stories. You know, let me make a, you know, let's reverse the video back from the thumbnail and the title, and then we'll create content, you know, to tell that story. You know, that's pretty easy to do. And so it is, you know, it is annoying to be doing something for 37 years and be, you know, feel like you're trying to teach people in a way that's, you know, environmentally sound, hopefully, you know, in a way that people can get better results in their garden, you know, in having a love of just tons of different types of plants. You know, and just kind of gardening in a different way, a little less lawn maybe. Lawn with a purpose. I always say lawn with a purpose. If you've got a purpose for a lawn, you got young kids, you like to chip golf balls, you like to throw frisbees, lawn is great. If you're not using it, why is it there? You know, I've got quite, you know, just really subtle approach to changing people up on gardening. It ain't gonna get views. Like, you know, I've got a very dedicated, amazing group of people that follow this channel, but I'm not gonna go out and get all the clickbait stuff from, you know, let's graft 10 different figs onto one fig plant, you know, kind of a video that would be easy for me to do and produce and probably get a, you know, million views very quickly, but it's useless. You know, it's absolutely useless information for most people, and has no real value in my mind. And so I'm just a different kind of person. So I don't think it's necessarily dumb things that people suggest in gardening. I just think it's over the, you know, it's just clickbaity. Like anything on YouTube, whatever you're watching, there's a clickbait version of it. It exists in gardening as well. So thank you guys so much for following along. Again, there's a lot of great content, I think, coming to the Learn to Garden video series. So if you haven't purchased it, consider it over at my website, HortTube.com. Thanks for watching.